There's often a stereotype about Indians. They're often seen as agreeable to a fault. IT workers and business owners. Simple people, and many countries often see Indians as weak. But there is one section of Indian society that none of these stereotypes apply to. The Indian Army is one of the most powerful, skilled, accomplished, and battle-hardened armies of the world. Most countries have standing armies, but hardly any army is as battle-hardened as the Indian Army, who has fought and defeated Pakistan in 4 wars, battled China in various skirmishes, and has been fighting terrorism in areas in Jammu and Kashmir and the Northeast for close to 70 years. The Army is also one of the few institutions in India that is pretty much universally respected. However, a controversy has emerged around the Indian Army in recent weeks, particularly related to the place of religion in the Indian Army. Many critics write that religion should have no place in the army and that it must be completely secular. Politicians have criticized the army by saying religious rituals have no place in the Indian army, and allowing such things will communalize and eventually weaken the army. So in today's video, we will discuss this issue. Is the Indian army supposed to be completely secular, completely divorce itself from religion, and whether religious influences weaken or strengthen the army? See, India shares its land borders with 7 countries. Many of these countries are openly hostile to India. Compare this to a country like the United States, which is largely surrounded by friendly countries. And all these areas are guarded by the Indian Armed Forces. They are the key to India's national security. But there's been a controversy around them every now and then. The controversy being any and all religious symbols should be kept completely out of the army. It should be completely and utterly secular. When the Agnivir scheme was introduced, there were allegations that it was an attempt to further the Hindutva grip on India. There was also a video in which army men were doing aarti in uniform, and there were articles written about how the Indian army was losing its secularism. Remember when Rajnath Singh, the Indian defense minister, conducted Shastra Puja or weapons puja when inducting the Rafale jets into the Indian Air Force? There was a lot of controversy around that as well.
ये तमाशा करने की आवश्यकता नहीं है.
We are tracking today. Congress leader Alka Lamba has mocked the Shastra Puja performed by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh.
Critics like Arundhati Roy have labelled the Indian Army a hand of the Indian state as an upper caste Hindu institution.
In all the northeastern states, there were tribal people. In Kashmir, it was the Muslims. In Telangana, it was the tribal people. In Hyderabad, it was the Muslims. In Goa, it's the Christians. In Punjab, it's the Sikhs. So you see this sort of upper caste Hindu state perpetually at war.
It's funny how everything is controlled by the upper caste in India, but despite that, they continue to allow over 50% reservation for non-upper castes in various areas of the country. They're like the worst villains ever. They're like the villains from Scooby-Doo. That they suck so bad at their job of being villains that they get foiled by a bunch of stoner kids and a dog.
We trapped them. They can't open the doors.
Now, in order to understand the role of religion or secularism in the army, let's first try to understand what secularism really means. See, the concept of secularism emerged in Western countries who suffered under the hegemony of the Catholic Church in the European Dark Ages. They were called the Dark Ages because no political, social, or cultural activity could be performed in Europe without the sanction of the Church. So secularism was the principle that ensures that the state and religion are completely separate.
Do you think that religion should be a personal choice? Not something that's ever imposed on people? So do we. This idea is called secularism. It's the principle that the state should stay neutral on matters of religion, to ensure that no faith receives unfair privileges. In a secular society, the state is kept separate from the church, and religious viewpoints aren't given preferential treatment.
The core principle is that the government will not take inspiration from religious institutions. At the same time, it will also not mess with religious affairs. For example, in France, the state-run schools were made completely non-religious. Not even any religious symbols were allowed in government buildings. Now, in terms of Western secularism, there are 2 broad streams, the French and the American. French secularism is rooted in its anti-clerical nature.
Now, modern secularism, the way we know it, I'm not talking about organic secularism, comes from the French Revolution and laicite. Unfortunately, from Robespierre and those very murderous revolutionaries of the French Revolution that started the Reign of Terror. And for them, this laicite was what? It was the complete removal of church from state, to the extent that they were forcing people. It was completely anti-clerical. the kind of restrictions they placed on the Catholic Church on priests and things like that were quite severe.
And the American secularism came from America's obsession with freedom.
It's a free country.
Contrast this with American secularism, which is today the stock standard of secularism. What did that derive from? These pilgrim fathers in the Mayfair, that ship called the Mayfair that landed, I think, was it in Massachusetts or Connecticut? I forget now where it landed. They were Puritans from England. Now, what people don't realize is the English Protestant persecutions of the Catholics were far, far worse than the Spanish Inquisition ever was. Okay, and these were Puritans derived from that Protestant tradition, who even by British Protestant standards were considered too extreme, and they got kicked out of England and they went off to America. And their thing was, we are lunatics, but we should see to it that every lunatic should have the freedom of expression. Unless, of course, you're Red Indians and things like that, in which case they'll shoot you and kill you. But it was freedom of expression of all Christian and to some extent Jews.
Now, coming back to the topic of secularism, in the Indian context, secularism is different. India has never really needed secularism because it has always, as a culture and civilization, believed in mutual respect and reciprocity. And this is because Indian religion and European religion are fundamentally different. European religion believes that there is only one way to believe and worship, because that is the fundamental belief of monotheism. There's only one God and only one way that is correct, and all other ways and all other gods are invalid, and that is why the God itself in Christianity calls themselves a jealous God. Abrahamic cultures abhor diversity. They insist on complete, unquestioning obedience. Look at the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments. Even before the commandments of don't murder, don't steal, love your wife, that's my bike, don't touch it, it's don't bloody worship anyone else, don't make images of anyone else. However, in comparison to that, India says the truth is one, but people choose to see this truth in many different ways, and that's a good thing. It's because the soul of India is plural. There are thousands of deities in India, and the devotees of each deity and even the non-believers have a chance to say what they want to say and what they believe in. In India, Shaivites, Vaishnavites, Advaitins, Ajivikas, Buddhists, Jains, along with the non-believing Charvakas and many more have existed in peace and relative harmony for a very long time. And this is why Indian dharma or Indian religion is a fundamentally liberal and pro-freedom religion.
You know, all these gods and goddesses that we have, they were all individually old gods and goddesses that were worshipped by the people, which got absorbed into the pantheon. None of it was demolished, none of it was smashed, it all got absorbed into the pantheon. So we were always secular in that sense.
Which is why it has always been easy for India to absorb traditions that are different from it. Allegedly, even the family of the Prophet found refuge in India. This is where the Zoroastrians, who were ethnically cleansed from Iran after the Islamic invasion of Iran, found refuge.
The Zoroastrians came from Iran. When Iran was conquered by Islam, and they butchered them and converted everybody to Islam. So those who didn't want to convert, they came to India and we received them and gave them a place to stay.
India is where the Jews found refuge, and India is probably the only country in the world without a history of anti-Semitism.
Jews were persecuted everywhere. Hitler sent them to gas chambers. One place they got to live with honor, and that was India.
And it is for precisely this reason that science was never at odds with Hinduism. And this is why ISRO scientists visit temples without any hesitation.
So ISRO chairman K. Sivan has also visited the Tirupati Mandir on the eve of Chandrayaan launch.
So I come to many temples. I read many scriptures. So try to find the meaning of what our existence and our journey in this cosmos.
Their scientific ethos doesn't clash with their spiritual journey in any way. And so let me give you animals some Western examples of scientists, because Indian scientists supporting dharma doesn't matter. But if a Westerner does it, it's suddenly good. So even Western scientists were positively struck by Indian dharma, and many scientists used it as a source of inspiration. Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb and the unfortunate participant in the Barbenheimer trend, recited a quote from the Bhagavad Gita when the nuclear test was finally successful.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Fritjof Capra, an astrophysicist who wrote the Tao of Physics, was also very intrigued by Hinduism.
They see the world in very similar ways. And to me, this was a very beautiful confirmation of the old Hindu concept that the world within and the world without are the same, or as they say, Brahman and Atman are the same.
There were other scientists like Schrödinger, the Austrian physicist who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1933. He said many things. He talked about his admiration of Indian dharma, and he said that his work was inspired by the Vedanta. Another physicist named Heisenberg.
Say my name.
No, not the guy that made meth. This guy. Even Heisenberg was inspired by Bharatiya Dharma. He once said, quantum theory will not look ridiculous to people who have read the Vedanta. Another famous Nobel Prize winner, Niels Bohr, was also inspired by Indian Dharma. Nikola Tesla was inspired by Indian Dharma. The famous scientist Carl Sagan was so inspired by Indian Dharma that he made an entire documentary about it.
The Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite, number of deaths and rebirths.
But after Indian independence, there was a very concerted attempt to bring Western-style secularism to India and its constitution, and to sever the fundamental connection of India to her religion, to her dharma. But that dharma has always shone through. The original Indian constitution contained images of Indian gods like Rama and Krishna, but these were hurriedly and strangely removed from the constitution, much like your ex removed your photos from their Facebook page. The motto of India, Satyameva Jayate, was taken from the Mukunda Upanishad. The national song of India is Vande Mataram, inspired by the Indian religion and culture.
He Chirosarathi Taboratha Chakre Mukharito Pathadino Ratri. Chirosarathi, or the eternal charioteer, is clearly a reference to Sri Krishna, who was Arjuna's charioteer. This only confirms that it is nobody else but God who Tagore had in mind while making our anthem.
In the Reserve Bank of India building, statues of yakshas can be seen next to the entrance. They represent the yakshas and the yakshi who guarded the wealth of Kuber. Many prominent Indian politicians attended the inauguration of the Somnath temple after it was rebuilt, despite Nehru prohibiting many politicians, including the President of India, from doing so. But the President of India thankfully showed him the same finger that India showed Pakistan every time Pakistan attacked. And now we're finally seeing the Indian government openly proud of India's native culture by celebrating the rebuilding of one of India's most sacred temples, the Ayodhya Ram Mandir. So now that we know the difference between Western secularism and Indian dharma or Indian pluralism, let's talk about the army and how this pluralism manifests itself in the army. The Indian army is made up of soldiers and officers of all religions. The Indian army has been led by a Zoroastrian, who is a micro minority in India. In 2011, their population was 0.06% of the Indian population. The Indian officer who oversaw the surrender of 93,000 Pakistani soldiers in the 1971 India-Pakistan war was a Sikh whose name was Lieutenant General J.S. Arora. When this was happening, the general who negotiated the surrender of the Pakistani army in 1971 was a Jew, and this was one of the first examples of a Hindu-Jewish conspiracy, or as people like to say, a Yahud-Hunud Sazish. The Indian army helps people irrespective of their religion. They helped people during the Jammu and Kashmir floods, where most of the people affected were Muslims. They helped people from Punjab and Haryana during the floods. The Indian armed forces have been part of 49 UN peacekeeping missions in different countries where there are people of different religions. The Indian army, because of it being grounded in Indian dharma, the Indian army is very comfortable in religion and its diversity. The Indian army has religious teachers that are available to people of all different religions. But at the end of the day, within the heart of the Indian army lies Indian dharma.
I would also like to tell you about a unique concept of the Indian army, which is called a Sarva Dharma Sthal. Now, this is a hall in which, let's say, all gods reside, of all faiths and all religions. So that is a place where all of us get together, irrespective of our faith or religion, and pray together. We celebrate our festivals together and partake in each other's festivities without any inhibitions in our mind, which is a step towards fostering the camaraderie that is required in the Indian Army.
सर्व धर्म स्थल ये इंडियन आर्मी में एक प्लेस ऑफ वर्शिप होती है जो किसी पर्टिकुलर रिलीजन के लिए नहीं है। ये मिलिट्री एस्टैब्लिशमेंट्स में एक डेजिग्नेटेड एरिया होता है जहां अलग अलग बैकग्राउंड से आए हुए सोल्जर्स और ऑफिसर्स साथ में आके पूजा, इबादत या प्रे करते हैं। सर्व धर्म स्थल का कॉन्सेप्ट एक दूसरे की रिलीजन के प्रति टॉलरेंस, रिस्पेक्ट और यूनिटी को प्रोपोगेट करना है।
And it's not like Western armies are strictly secular either, that they completely separate religion from the battlefield, because Western armies also integrate religious practices. They have chaplains for different religions.
Chaplains have been an integral part of Army history and remain vital to its future.
Whether leading worship, visiting the hospital, or counseling soldiers and their families, Army chaplains are always at the front line of the soldier's life.
Last night, Mommy kissed in Santa Claus.
I love being in the chaplain corps. It's a passion for me to see sailors grow in their faith and in their own personal lives and see their families thrive as well.
In Russia, priests have long blessed guns, tanks, and different kinds of weapons. While tanks were going to Ukraine, priests were sprinkling holy water on them. And the situation is similar with the Indian army. In fact, Indian warriors from time immemorial have found inspiration in religion. From the Gorkhas' fierce Jai Mahakali, Ayo Gorkhali, invoking goddess Kali, to the Rajputana Rifles call Raja Ramchandra ki Jai, to Dogra regiment saying Jwala Mata ki Jai, Sikh regiment saying Jo Bole So Nihal, Sat Sri Akal, the Naga regiment saying Jai Durga Naga, among many other religion-based war cries. These aren't just war, they represent a profound connection to their historical and cultural roots, instilling valor and courage. Soldiers in India, as they do across the world, use their religion and their cultural heritage as a source of inspiration. In ancient times as well, these war cries were used to invoke gods and goddesses to gain courage and valor from. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj would invoke the blessings of goddess Bhavani, seeking her protection and guidance. The Marathas also used to invoke Lord Shiva with the chant of Har Har Mahadev. Har Har Mahadev! The rulers of Vijayanagar were known for their devotion to Lord Venkateshwara and often performed elaborate rituals before setting out to war. The Cholas, one of the longest ruling dynasties in southern India, were ardent devotees of Lord Shiva. They often invoked Shiva's blessings before embarking on military campaigns. Temples dedicated to Shiva, such as the Brihadeshwar temple, served not only as places of worship but also as centers of political and military strategy. Also, Vetrivel Veeravel, translated to victorious spear, courageous spear, has been historically used as a war cry by Tamil warriors since ancient times. Vel means spear or lance in Tamil. Vel is the holy lance of the Hindu god of war, Murugan. Guru Gobind Singh also invoked goddess Bhagwati before heading into war by saying Devi in his famous Dehi Shiva Varmohe speech. The practice of Shastra Puja or weapon worship is a long-standing tradition among Indian warriors and today in the Indian army, observed by governments across different eras from the BJP to the Congress. Many Indian generals in the army have seen Lord Rama as a motivating figure.
We are strong because we are right. And in that morality is our strength. I told you about giving a burial to 52 enemy soldiers. I told you about Dushmani Mein Sharafat. All these things are ingrained in the DNA of the Indian army. This is how this army functions.
The late General Bipin Rawat famously kept a copy of the Bhagavad Gita in his office, reflecting its role as a spiritual guide and a reminder of righteousness and duty. The Indian Military Academy in Dehradun is believed to be located on the grounds where Dronacharya, the legendary guru from the Mahabharata, trained the Pandavas, linking modern military training to ancient traditions. The Indian Navy also incorporates significant cultural and Itihasic symbols in its naming conventions. For example, the Garud Commando Force is named after Garuda, a fierce celestial bird and the vehicle of Lord Vishnu. In jobs like this, where your life is literally on the line, you need a very strong motivator. One big motivator, obviously, in a country like India, why people join the army is that it's a stable job. That's a massive luxury in a country where a large percentage of the population is still poor. But another motivator when you're in the army is that you're protecting something that is bigger than you. That can be the brotherhood of the regiment. You will do anything to protect your brothers in arms. You do not want to let down your brothers in arms. Many soldiers in the Kargil war lost their lives trying to retrieve their injured or fallen brothers in arms from enemy fire. But it is also important to understand that another strong motivator is the desire to protect your heritage, your way of life that has existed for thousands of years and will be destroyed if you fail to protect it. It is for that reason that cries of Raja Ramchandra ki Jai or Jai Bhavani play a crucial role. Are used by regiments and not Constitution ki Jai, because Constitution ki Jai just doesn't have the same ring to it as Raja Ramchandra ki Jai. Hundreds of countries have a constitution, but only your country has your culture, your heritage, your way of life, your gods and goddesses that your ancestors have preserved for millennia. See, India is a country that sees no conflict between reason, pluralism, and religion. And so, in my opinion, the army doesn't need to adhere to these Western secular principles where religion has to be completely and utterly separate from public life. As long as there is no discrimination on religion, I don't think including religion in the army hurts anyone, because in fact it acts as a very, very strong motivator. And I want to ask you, do you believe that religion should be completely and utterly removed from the armed forces, or do you believe that it acts as an important motivator for the armed forces? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as usual, guys, if you're enjoying our long form English explainer videos, let me know what I should do an explainer video on next. I'm thinking of doing a long explainer series on the caste system, because as we've seen in the 2024 elections, caste has played a very big role, and many people argue that caste needs to be destroyed in order for Indian society to come together and to prosper and grow. So I'm thinking of making a bit of an explainer videos on what caste is, what purpose it served, why it needs to be fought, and why it needs to be surmounted. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a series like that in English. Other than that, I'll see you for the next episode, and until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you for the next one. And to all of you, is secular pranam.
और अभी तो रुको, क्लाइमैक्स अभी बाकी.
Many countries have many particularly related to they continue to allow 69 nearly over 50% reservation for non-upper castes in various areas of the country.
It was at this moment that he knew he fucked up.
Hot as fuck.